So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that Heather can take over the screen and take us through navigating thinking traps.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. Super happy to be with all of you. I'm just getting ready to share my screen here. We'll be talking about navigating thinking traps this morning. This is learning that we started last time, and I'm just opening it back up, so give me just a second. I lost it when I was answering a question within the Q&A. So while I'm grabbing this up, I do want to share that if you are using the Slido, there's a Q&A portion, and then there is a survey portion. And right now, some of the responses to the survey questions are going into the Q&A. So take a moment and just see that there are two parts so that you're finding that right space. So when we think about the thinking traps, I'd like to take a moment just to go back to the last time because it's been a few months. Take a moment, and whether you're in a room with someone and you have a partner sitting next to you, you might do this with one or two people sitting next to you, or if you're alone in your own space, take a moment and go fist to five, meaning start with a fist and say, okay, can we come up with 5 ideas? They answer one of the 2 questions. Where have you encountered evidence of thinking traps or have had opportunities to reflect on adult learning trajectories? And what details are sticking out to you from last time? I'm going to ask for just 2 minutes to see if you can come up with 5 ideas that relate back to this learning we began last time to help us dig into this work. I'll set a timer for 2 minutes. All right, so with that, this was meant just to help us dig back into that learning from last time, and we're going to revisit all as a group now. So reminders around thinking traps, those are habitual ways of thinking about learning and educational change that we can and often do fall into. But what we know is that these don't lead to positive outcomes and that they're not effective. They're often built into our educational systems, organizations, and roles as the way things are done. They're like some of the things that came up last time as we went through this were misconceptions, and these thinking traps are often built on misconceptions. What makes it different is that these are things that trend over time and are within systems, within organizations, or even within roles. So as teachers, we often do this, or as a grade level, we often do this, and we've done this for the last 15 years. So it's not, sometimes we might think about thinking traps and misconceptions, but thinking traps go beyond what a misconception might be. And thinking traps are what we cannot do, and it's what won't work. We know that these things don't work, but we just fall into them. And sometimes it's unconscious. Like we don't even realize that we're falling into those traps, and this is something that it's the way we do, it's the way we work. So we want to spend time thinking about these and uncovering these so that we don't fall into them anymore. Last time we went through a few thinking traps. The first one we went through as a group was thinking about viewing change as a kid learning challenge rather than an adult learning challenge. The other one we looked at was if we design, explain, and deliver high quality resources in one-off experiences, change will happen. Those are very prevalent in the educational world, and so we spent some time talking about those. We often also lifted a few literacy-specific ones, like that everything has to be taught in a literacy block, talked about intervention, small groups, and having this whole "this too shall pass" mentality that often occurs in a school setting. Last time I also asked you within the Slido, after you had some time with your teams, to think through what are some of those thinking traps that affect you, and what are the ones that you're running into most often in your day-to-day work? And you lifted the following top 4 as the top ones that are affecting this network. The first one is one shot or one day PD is sufficient. That was overwhelmingly the one that came in the most from all of you as your top priority that you wanted to explore further or that you're seeing affect your role. Another one was there isn't enough time for X, Y, and Z. So there's not enough time to add in this program. There isn't enough time to teach all my standards. The next one was if we just had blank, this resource, this curriculum, our student achievement would be so much better. And the final one was around small group. There was a lot of different pieces that came in around small group in lots of different ways. But really the idea overall is just, it's all small group and all small group is effective. So some of you may have said things like, it's for tier 2 only, or it's doing the same thing just in smaller groups. So that was another thinking trap that this group said, these are top on our list for what affects our day-to-day coaching with teachers and administrators. We also talked last time about this, how learning unfolds and this learning trajectory, and how we like to think about learning as the straight arrow that we pick something up and we just get better and better and better at it. And what we know from research is that it's messy and learning is real and it doesn't follow that line most often. And it actually most often follows something more like what's on your screen right now. So starting with some resistance, starting to like, I don't want to do it. You can't make me do it, or do I have to? And then saying, okay, I have to, and moving into compliance or feeling like either from outside or internal motivation or external motivation that I need to do this. And so you start to comply. And then by the time we get to the end, like you believe in it and you're seeing the results and we're becoming more skilled. And this all needs to happen within that inquiry community, which also falls within the school, the district landscape, the national landscape. Like it can't happen in isolation. There's all these things that are affecting our learning pathway. And we have those events, routines, rules, and tools that we've beginning to use to help frame how we can think about professional learning journeys. And in order to make that learning happen, we know that we have to support our educators through things like reflective dialogue, deprivatization of practice, collaboration, shared norms, and collective focus on student learning. And that helps through these processes, using our rules, our events, routines, tools, all aligned to these outcomes, helps to move us into that internalization and that where we can fully invest in the learning that we're doing. So for today's session, so that's just a quick review of where we were because it has been a few months. And so just those highlights, moving into today's session and our work for today. In order to help think about what to do for today, we took the feedback from you that you wanted something that was coaching specific. You wanted tools or resources to take away with you at the end of the day. And you wanted to think about thinking traps more. So in order to meet that need, we're going to look at a tool called Navigating Thinking Traps, a coaching conversation support tool. And before we get into this is how it's going to look for the next section. We are going to explore a tool that can be used to support others in navigating thinking traps. The why is to collaboration around coaching is key to lifting all of us as a network. And the how, we're going to learn about the steps of the tool. We'll listen to a scenario of a conversation using the tool, and then we'll discuss that tool in teams. So I'm going to share those questions with you right now so that you know when you go into your breakouts how you want to share. The first question is, how might this session or tool support you in your work? And the second question is, how might we make this tool better for the network? And what suggestions for improvement might you have? Before I share the tool, let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. It is a process to help uncover thinking traps and navigate through them. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution to fixing thinking traps. It is a draft. It's a start of a community resource tool. It is not final. It is one way to approach this work and to approach uncovering and moving through navigating thinking traps. It is not the only way. And it is a limited sample. It's not exhaustive. So with that, I'll share the tool. It is linked in the agenda, and there's 2 versions linked. I'm going to pull up the first version that's linked in, which takes up the whole screen. But then there's a PDF version, which is easier for printing, that has the white along the side and will fit nicely on a page for you. So this is what the Thinking Traps tool will look like, and we'll go through it through the PowerPoint in a minute, but it starts with the title, and then you'll see how it's layered with power of pause, purposeful paraphrase, and then layered and intentional questioning with a closure. So power of the pause, and we'll go through this pretty quickly. Power of the pause, using the pause to help us think about what thinking traps the coachee might, or group that we're working with, might be encountering. So it gives us a chance to pause and say, where are they headed? What am I hearing? And I've included some keywords in there that might help us cue in that there is a thinking trap that's under the surface that we might want to bring out. The next piece is using a purposeful paraphrase. And so when we notice a trap or hearing something that's just under the surface, we can use that purposeful paraphrase to help lift it to the surface. So we might provide clarity to you as a coach through that paraphrase. It might help to lift that, and it's an opportunity to allow for misconceptions or misunderstandings to be captured. And it allows the coachee or group to hear the trap. And it can create an opportunity for the coachee or group to shift thinking or add additional insight to what you've heard. And it's helping to uncover. And then the next piece is really layered and intentional questioning. So on the tool, it's listed top down. That doesn't mean that you have to start with questions to provide clarity. It doesn't mean that you have to start with or end with a third point of reference. The idea is that you're going to layer those questions in for what your coachee or the group you're working with needs. And so that's how this is indicated through these arrows. We'll go through each of these types of questions and why we might use them. And then we end with closure questions. So the first one is questions provide clarity and seek understanding. So we're really trying to understand, what is the thinking behind this thinking trap? What does this look like in action? What are their plans? And it's really for you and to make sure that we're understanding as we go through. It's also a place where you might uncover what beliefs or learning goes into that thinking trap and why it's being held. So questions like, what might it look like to see this in action? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, what would a 10 look like for? Reflective questions. This is really to help our coachee go through and think through how this might look. So you might bring up other options here as to promote a deeper reflection for our coachee or the group. You might ask them to think about barriers or constraints, or things that have happened in the past and how that has worked for them and how we might take that and bring it to this future situation. And then the last question is, what thinking traps might we be falling into if familiar with the language? So once you have a team that is familiar with language, it becomes a really powerful tool. So if your whole team knows what a thinking trap is, then you can use that language, and we can now attend more, we can attend better to that in the moment. So if we know, we can say, what thinking traps might we be falling into? And then we say, now, how might we attend to? So for example, if they said, oh, we're falling into the one and done, we can say, all right, how might we attend to ongoing collaboration? And we can name the pieces that will move through and dismantle that trap. The other type of question is something where you might refer them to a third point of reference. It might be a sample, it might be research, it might be a resource. It could be additional ideas that you might have seen or heard. And so that would bring that to move that forward. So when we're thinking about the third point of reference for the ones that you shared that were most important to you, one example might be with the one shot or one day PD is done, organizational practices. We have research on what PD should look like. You could share Dr. Alison Fox-Resnick's work with the Learning Trajectory in her new Learning Together book. It could be research on coaching or professional learning. It could be examples of high quality PD. It could also be where you go through professional learning together. So for example, if you really want to do some deep learning around professional learning and robust professional learning systems, I put a flyer in the agenda for the leader series that will be starting in January. For example, with number 2, there isn't enough time. You can look at the essential practice and say, well, what is essential? You can look at Nell's video with science and social studies. So this is just a slide. I'm not going to go through all of it, but as a group, if you have a thinking trap that is prevalent in your region, prevalent in your school, or prevalent in the teachers you work with, take a moment to say what research or outside resources might provide a third point of reference. And then the closure. Bringing it to an end, what are those next steps so that when you leave, you know where you're headed next. And just to name that this is a draft tool, a lot of different resources are in there as far as it's based on the learning I've had as a coach, from my colleagues, from personal experience, and from additional reading. Next, we're going to move through a scenario. Erin is going to work with me. We're going to do a live scenario reading where a coach is coaching at her monthly meeting with a principal. And throughout the modeling process, we will pause. I'm going to do a Zach Morris style pausing. And we're going to ask you for your input, your insight, and your expertise, because the expertise in this room is phenomenal. And one thing that we sometimes feel as coaches, or I sometimes hear, is, did I ask the right question? Am I doing it right? And being able to hear from others is going to be super helpful. Okay, so with that, Erin, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hi. So the committee came to a consensus last week about a new curricular resource, and it looks like you're going with Learning Lots. I know you've invested a lot of time and energy into this decision. How are you feeling about it?
Really good. I wasn't sure if we were going to get there at the beginning of the process. We had 2 different camps of teachers, and I wasn't sure there was a resource that would be research aligned that they could all agree on. I think that the first step of outlining what was important to them gave them a little more buy-in, and then using that with the research aligned rubrics and data process for piloting helped. In the end, we had 11 out of 13 with Learning Lots as their number 1, and the rest said they would publicly support it. So that's definitely a win to me.
Okay, so you're feeling pretty positive about the momentum going into adoption.
I am.
What might be some next steps for you or the committee?
Well, I've already started working with Sheila on ordering the materials, so that part is already moving. Then the committee wants to help plan the PD around the new resource. I know you can help with that too. There's a lot to learn with it. This will be a pretty big shift for about a third of my staff. So I'm going to try to do a full day PD with the vendor in the morning, and then maybe have you or the committee members in the afternoon. The committee could help guide what really needs to be covered.
Can you share more about your goals for the professional learning?
Sure. My hope is that after the PD day, teachers will feel confident using the resource, knowing the most important parts, and can make decisions to meet their students' needs. I'm really hoping to see the student scores increase next year too.
All right, so we're going to do a Zach Morris timeout here. And I'm going to ask you to think about what thinking trap might she be falling into. And it is open on your Slido. I will share the screen, but you will see those start popping in. What thinking trap is she falling into? So it is a one and done, but also she's also running into that the first is the PD is the one and done, but the second one is the program will fix it. She thinks that if we give a program, it's going to fix everything. So we see both of those coming across. And now I need to make a decision as a coach as to where to go next. And I'm going to focus in on the first one of that it's a one and done PD, because I can always come back and circle into that the program's going to fix it and help expand upon that. So your second question is, how might you paraphrase this conversation thus far?
Heather, I'm just going to interrupt real quick. I'm acknowledging that apparently you can't continue to type in the Slido as soon as we change the slide. So we're going to try to fix that by sharing, reopening and sharing through a screen differently.
Okay.
But I just want to make sure that everyone understands that, because I think some people are getting booted out of answering a question as soon as the slide moves.
Okay. All right, so on your own screens, you'll be able to see where that paraphrase is coming through. So go ahead and we can see things like, I heard you speak about the PD opportunity you're providing. What other PD might you have lined up? You feel positive about the new program, and I think it will lead to some good outcomes. Where I went was, all right, so you want to honor your teacher's needs by having the committee provide input that shapes the PD day. And then after that, they should be ready to implement and be able to improve student outcomes.
Yeah, that's the thinking. They're a good staff. My staff meetings are pretty full usually, but I'm hoping to maybe do a check-in during a staff meeting after a couple months of questions.
So with that, let's think about what questions you might pose next. So what question might you pose here? All right, I'm starting to see some questions come across. So what other options may be possible? How might you support your teachers with the curriculum moving forward? What might this look like in action? What might your check-ins include? What other PD options might there be? So lots of options here. We'll let that go for just a second as we continue. All right, so it sounds like you're already considering at least one check-in. What other opportunities might there be to revisit or deepen the learning in other spaces or ways?
I don't really know. My other PD days are already used, and so are most of my staff meetings. The teachers do have shared planning time, though.
So how might we respond in this moment? So she just shared that she does have shared planning time. How might you move her along in this conversation? All right, so how could you use shared planning time to help support teachers? What could it look like if you considered meeting during that time? Have you considered meeting with teachers during their shared planning time? And here's where we'll continue. Shared planning time may be a great space to continue learning over time. I'm also in the building every other week, so we can be really intentional about my support too. Would you mind if I shared with you a graphic from Dr. Allison Fox-Resnick about how learning unfolds? It might help us think through how the PD day, along with the other events you're considering, might work together to create a professional learning plan that meets your goals.
This is helpful. I definitely want to spend some time looking and thinking about this.
So how might I support you or the committee in planning more for the PD day and long-term planning? Would you like me to join you at your next meeting? Or maybe we can co-plan for the next meeting and then either of us or both of us could facilitate.
Why don't you just talk more about the graphic with all of us? I think that'll be enough discussion right there. Then you and I can talk about next steps.
Okay, I can definitely do that. Thank you. All right. So with that, that is an example of how that tool might work and how you might move through that tool. We're going to continue with our next piece and we're going to move into breakout rooms. In the breakout rooms, I'm going to ask you to think about the following two questions. What might this session or a tool like this support you, or how might this session or a tool like this support you in your work? And how might we make this tool better for the network? What suggestions for improvement might you have? With that, I'm going to open the breakout rooms. We are headed into break. Thank you for the time this morning to explore the thinking traps a little bit further and using a tool that can help us through coaching someone through those thinking traps. As you are headed off to break, if you have something that came out of your group and your talk that you would like to share, please feel free to do that with the Slido. One takeaway from our group was, and if you can share that, that would be greatly appreciated.